Beautiful, Josh. That was awesome.
Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Mini Pietenpol. Now if you haven't seen the FT Mini Pietenpol release video, I strongly encourage you to watch that. Now the FT Mini Pietenpol is really near and dear to my heart because it's a model after a full-scale version that I fly. It's a source of many happy memories since I was about 12 years old. I feel really blessed to fly the big one. I want to show you how to build the small one. As always, you have free downloadable plans created by Dan Sponholz and proofed by the amazing beta builder team, along with flight simulators coming in the near future. And this is one of the first planes where we actually are giving you free STL files to be able to print highly detailed things like this dummy engine that you see here. If you guys want to support us in the store, that's how you pay our bills. Go ahead and feel free to look down the link below to get the kit build, cut your time in half. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. Now there's three things we want to do before building our airframe, which is going to make the experience a lot quicker and a lot more enjoyable. That's going to be centering our servos, building and mounting the motor to our power pod, making sure it runs the right direction. And let's go ahead and pre-bind our receiver and our transmitter. Now we're going to be using the DX6E. It's a great entry-level transmitter that has a lot of powerful features, under $200. Now it's really important before we install the servos that we center them and we also install the proper servo horns. This is going to change from model to model. So in this one here, these are the 9051s. This process is the same even if you're using the ES0882s, which are 9-gram servos. These are 4.5 grams. In this build, we're going to be using the smaller of the X control horns, which is this one right here. Now you're going to notice that there's two arms that are longer and two arms that are shorter. We're going to preserve only one of the shortest arms. So we're going to take this and flip it over on its back, and we're going to cut off the extra three. Watch your eyes. These servos are incredibly high quality, even though they're very economical. I'm going to put this on to show you how well centered they are from the factory. I'm going to plug this into our servo centering tool. If you don't have one of these tools, it is so convenient and so useful in so many ways. I strongly recommend you getting it. This is only about $7 from our store. We'll have a link down below for you to use. On the side of a servo centering tool, you're going to notice three indicators. You got your servo, which is your signal wire, your positive, and your negative. We're going to line up the ground wire with the negative, the power's in the middle, and the signal wire, which is usually white or yellow, will be on the top. For powering this, a simple quick tip that you can do if you don't have a single cell battery is using the balance lead of a 2 or 3 cell battery. Now you're going to notice on the battery, you always have a power indicated wire. So here's your positive red, all the rest are considered negatives. And we're going to only take the red one up to line up with the power and the ground on the servo centering tool. You don't want to put a 2-cell on this because it's going to destroy your tool and your servos and void your warranty. So now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to plug my power line into the middle, my ground going down towards the bottom, and now I have 1 cell worth of power. Now you're going to notice that these multiple ports are here. It doesn't matter which plug you plug in to power your unit, and you can center 3 servos at one time. This tool also works to test motors and ESCs. Now that we have this, you can see that I can move my servo back and forth with no problem. Now I was talking about how well centered this is up. I'm going to turn this to the extreme, and I'm going to clip center, and you're going to see it's spot on from the factory. You never want to take this for granted because if you do, and you install this, and you power it on, you're going to use all your sub trims and all your trim to override it. What centered servo technically is basically just telling the servo to be in the center position so it has equal throws both ways. Now with this servo guide, if I flip the center and you see something like this, all you need to do is install your servo horn at 90 degrees. Once we're happy with that center, we're going to drop in the shortest little screw and twist it down in. You notice with my fingers I supported the screw as I turned it in so I didn't strip out the gears. Now we're going to do the exact same on the opposite one. The only difference is we want this servo horn to go the other direction. Kaboomskis. Plug it in. There you go. Once again, centered beautifully. Drop the shortest screw in our pack in there. And there we have it. The Emax servo is one of our favorite servos. We've been using them forever. The only time we ever get failures is in a very hard crash or if someone puts too much voltage through it. Alright, our servos are now centered. Our control horns are on. We're ready to move to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to build the power pod, mount the motor, install the ESC, and make sure your motor's spinning in the proper direction. Now before we get started on the main portion of our build, the first thing we're going to want to assemble is our power pod. This portion right here, along with the firewall, is our power pod. This is going to carry our motor and ESC, and also interchange from many of the other mini swappables. An easy tip for not cutting through the paper is to dull the very tip of your knife. Now you can do this by rubbing it over a piece of sandpaper, or just simply take it down to the floor and drag it on the concrete a couple times. Don't do this if you have carpet. To get started with our power pod, we're first going to do a light score down through our 2 score lines. Now if you're scratch building, this is going to be indicated by a red line. Just take the blade down close to the paper, but don't go through it. We're going to fold 180 degrees over and peel off the foam. We're going to do this on both sides. Right, now that our cavities are cleared out, we're going to go ahead and do an A-fold. An A-fold is where the side cheeks go above the bottom plate. To practice this move for gluing, we're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table and rotate the bottom plate 90 degrees while pushing down firmly on the table. This is going to give us a nice clean 90-degree edge with the bottom plate below the side plate. Once we practice that move, we're going to put a thin bead of glue, starting and stopping the bead of glue about a 1/4 inch from the edge. Once we have that, we're going to rotate 90 degrees and we're going to hold it there for about 45 seconds. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. We're going to focus the main portion of glue on an A-fold on the bottom of the side plate. That way we get most of the strength in our joint and not on the paper. Once again, our side plate is on the bottom. Rotate it 90 degrees and hold for 45 seconds. At this point, we're ready to glue on our firewall. For reference on what side we glue the firewall, we're going to look at what direction the A is pointing to. On many of our little mini models, we have quite a degree of right thrust, and we want to be able to keep that to keep the performance good. On different models, it may be pointing towards a flat 90-degree angle, and that will be on things like the Arrow and the Sparrow. Once we have the side that we need, we're going to put a healthy bead of glue on the very top surface. And we're going to drop our firewall in. While that's drying, we're going to take off about 5 inches of packing tape, and we're going to go right over the top, centering it up, pushing down towards the sides. This is going to be where all your strength is coming from, not from the glue. So don't neglect this step or your motor is going to pop off in flight or during an impact in the ground. Just like wrapping a gift for Christmas, we're going to cut 2 little reliefs. We're going to fold the edges in. Now we can go back and cut off any excess that we may have. Now at this point, it's very important that we remove the tape from the center section and also where our screw holes are going to be. If we don't remove this tape, the shaft of the motor is going to rub against that and it's going to cause it to bind and make you think that you have an ESC or a motor problem. It's easy to overheat the ESC if you don't do this step and destroy it. So now our center hole is opened up, and I've also relieved both the bigger holes for the 2204 motor. Now this mini power pod can carry an 1806 A pack or a 2204 motor, which is the B pack right here. The 1806 will use the 2 thinner holes that are vertical. The 2204 will use the horizontal holes that are bigger. I'm going to install the F pack or the 2204 motor right now. This motor is real nice. It even comes with a little Allen wrench for you to use. We're going to take this apart. Notice we have bullet connectors, so there's no soldering needed. We make sure that every power pack that we carry in our store has bullet connectors, so it's just plug and play. You don't need to solder. Now I want to take special attention towards these screws. You're going to notice a couple of these screws are shorter than the other ones. This is very important. We want to separate the long and the short screws from each other and get the long screws completely out of the picture. Reason being is we're only going to use the short screws in this step. Now this is the same for the APAC as well. If you run the long screws through the firewall, it's going to hit the windings and it's going to cause the motor to short out and potentially destroy your motor and your ESC and void your warranty. So make sure you separate these screws right now. With our short screws isolated and ready to be used, I'm going to go ahead and just open up these holes just a little bit. I'm actually going to just use the tip of my Allen wrench here. With a little twisting motion, just open it up a touch. This is going to make installing our motors even easier. There we go. If you have any hot glue in the back, just knock that out of the way. Make sure your screws can pass through nice and easy. We're going to go ahead and pre-thread our short screw. Notice I'm saying short a lot. It's because it's so important. Most of the time when you have a motor or ESC problem, it's because too long of screws have come in and hit the windings on the motor, or that you have tape in the center section. I'm going to screw this down to just bring it out maybe a ½ millimeter, just enough for the threads to engage with the motor. I'm going to do that on both sides. There we go. Now the motor has two spacings. It has a short width and a long width. I believe this is 16 millimeters and this is 19 millimeters. We're going to focus on the portion that's 16 millimeters. We're going to wiggle it around until it centers up right over those screws. There, you kind of hear it pop in there. Now we're going to go back and forth just a half turn at a time until we feel both screws engaging. We don't want to lift our motor off of the firewall. We want the screw to engage the back of the motor and to thread in nice and even. So when we tighten this down, the motor ends up firmly against the firewall and not lifted off. While we're doing this, you'll see that there's a gap in here between the motor. You can inspect that every couple turns to make sure that the threads don't get anywhere close to the windings. Do this on every motor you install, not just the power pods, but quadcopters, planes, anything that you install. Make sure that those screws are not too long. Now that our motor is installed into our power pod, we're going to go ahead and connect our ESC. You're going to see 3 wires that'll plug right in to our motor. Once again, if you're using any of our power packs, all these bullets are pre-soldered to go with the proper motors, so just plug and play. One thing you want to make sure is don't leave these out just a little bit so they can touch and short out. That's going to burn up your motor and your ESC. Make sure they're nice and closed and there's no exposed brass. Now that we have that, we can take this over to our little servo centering tool, and I'm going to turn it to manual and turn it all the way to 0. I'm going to plug in the lead of our ESC. Now that we have that, I'm going to plug this in. It's now activated. 3 beeps means it's a 3-cell battery. I'm going to turn this very slowly. Now you're going to see that this motor is turning clockwise. We want this to spin counterclockwise because this is a tractor style plane that's installing into it. It's not a wing. So because of that, I'm going to take 2 of these leads and I'm going to swap them. In our beginner series, we cover a lot of the details on how these motors work, the science behind it, and also things like ESC calibrations, etc. Now that we swapped this, I'm going to power it up. And now the motor spins counterclockwise, and that's the direction we want. Always make sure, especially with the minis, that if you have right thrust, you want this to spin counterclockwise. Otherwise, it's going to pull off to the left, and you won't be able to recover from it. Our motor's now spinning properly. We're ready for our build. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to assemble the wing, starting with the main spars, double bevel cuts, gluing the spars in, finishing the wing, and getting our dihedral. So for the wing build, we're only going to need 4 pieces. That's going to be our main wing section, our spar, and our 2 wing gauges. Once you have those popped out, we're going to go ahead and put our attention first towards the main spar. There's a score cut, and the score cut is indicated by red on the plans. A big thank you to Dan Sponholz and the Beta Builder team for vetting the plans and making them great. We're going to take this score cut, we're going to fold it 180 degrees, and we're going to glue this shut. I'm just going to go ahead and put 3 little layers of glue. I'm always using the table as my friend. I'm going to press down firmly. Give this about 45 seconds to let it dry thoroughly. Now that our spar section is done, we're going to go ahead and put that to the side and put our attention on the main wings. The first thing we want to do is a double bevel cut, and that's going to be right in the leading edge in this section right here. To prepare the surface for the double bevel cut, let's go ahead and lay this down on the table, fold it 180 degrees. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this kind of in front of the camera here, but you can actually take this to the edge of the table. To do a bevel cut, we're going to extend a nice sharp razor blade. This is a really great OFAL blade that's included in our Crafty kit. The Crafty kit includes things like the Pro 200 glue gun, 2 pounds of glue sticks, squares, centering gauges, everything you need to be able to build all 40 plus of our designs. So we're going to extend this razor blade, and at about a 45-degree angle, keeping the tip of the blade just above the paper, we're going to go ahead and slice in. Now we don't want to have the blade 90 degrees or it's going to wander too easy. We want to keep it at a nice angle, make sure our thumbs are away, and very carefully pull through. Now if you're uncomfortable using a razor blade, you can use a sanding block for this. Check out our link below for tips on building without razor blades. We're going to flip this over 180 degrees, and we don't need to do a bevel the whole length. We only need to do it where the thing's going to fold over. So we're going to go ahead and go back once again, go right down to the edge of the paper, bevel 1, bevel 2. See, I kind of rolled in and out and saved it. If we did this right, you should see a nice beveled edge that should be able to fold at least 90 degrees with no resistance. Now, if this is your first time building or you accidentally go through the paper in the center section, don't worry about that. You can always take a piece of tape and repair that edge. If it looks very thin there, go ahead and be proactive about it and put a reinforcing strip of tape on there, so that way when you fold the wing over, it doesn't break. To give this a good test bend, before we address any of these score lines, I'm going to hold this flat against the table, and I'm going to very, very carefully bend this over nice and slow. What I want to see is this bend easily 180 degrees, all the way down to the table, without deflecting or crinkling this here. Once our leading edge is nice and smooth and we're happy with that look, we can go ahead and take a barbecue skewer from our kit, and just using the very tip of it, we're going to very lightly drag, just breaking the surface tension and establishing a nice little crease line on each line. Now what I strongly encourage you is on some kits that we don't do this process, other kits we do. It all depends on the characteristics we want from the wing. So don't go ahead and proactively do this on every kit, and especially don't use the blunt end and dig all the way down to the paper. If you do so, it's going to be very hard to build your wing straight and not make it too blunt. One more practice fold here, and what we should see now is the wing starting to take form. We should see our leading edge rolling up and an airfoil starting to form. But we need something to bring this up here, and that's what our spar is going to do. With our spar, we're going to see we have two sides, one completely cut through and the other one just a score cut. We want the one that's completely cut through to be facing up towards us, and I prefer the folded edge to be facing towards the back trailing edge like this. So cut through lines, the folded edge facing towards the trail. That just keeps things looking nice and clean. This is going to fit perfectly right on the back edge or the trailing edge of the bottom surface of the wing. Once we're happy with that, nice bead of glue, once again 3 places. We're not going to put any glue in those creases here or here. We're going to line this up, kind of wiggle it around just a little bit, spread that glue nice and thin, and then we're going to take our time and energy, putting it right at the trailing edge of the bottom surface of the wing. Now would be a good time to start putting a little bit more form to the wing. We're going to put a lot of attention and take our time in this, and we're going to do the sequence just a little bit different because I want a nice even form of the wing, and since there's such a large undercambered section, it's very easy to have this flatten out on the wingtips. Now in my building, I haven't noticed too much of an adverse characteristic when that happens, but it doesn't look quite right. So we're going to go ahead and just do a practice fold, start seeing what our airfoil looks like. We should see the top surface of the wing here. That should be parallel with the table all the way across. What we want to do is we want to make this leading edge cup down and meet the table just like it does in the center section. So we're going to go ahead and put some attention towards that, and I'll show you how. You can see that I'm focusing my thumbs and I'm rolling this up, keeping this against the table the whole way down. I want to see a nice even crease all the way down. You don't have to get too aggressive and you don't have to crease the foam. Just slowly work it and you'll see what I mean. Once we're happy with that, we're going to make sure we have plenty of glue in our glue gun. We're going to take the nozzle directly against the tip and we're going to put a nice thin bead of glue right down in that crease all the way across. Now instead of folding it over completely, we're going to repeat that motion that we just did. Just holding this about a 45 degree up and give it a nice gentle bend. You're going to want to sit here for about 45 seconds to a minute. You don't want this to flatten out. You want to make sure when you kind of touch this that the glue is nice and hard. Just taking my nail here and I'm lightly scraping off the glue globs. Now that's getting hard. It's just about rock hard. And by doing that, it gives you a nice clean seam, but it also pushes the rest of the glue into the seam. Don't do this when it's hotter, it's going to burn your finger. Now when I do my practice crease, you're going to notice now that these wingtips actually come down, come very close to the table, and it's parallel along each side. That's exactly what we want to see. Now that we're happy with that, we can go back and repeat the exact same process 2 more times on these 2 creases here and here. We've got plenty of glue in our glue gun. We always check before we start squeezing glue down. Thin bead. Thin bead. Now, we're going to be very careful not to firmly glue this permanently to this table here, but we are going to go ahead and fold this over. And I'm going to bring my hands just out more. I'm going to make sure my trailing edge is firmly flat against the back of the table. And I'm also going to kind of put my attention here towards the outer wingtips, just making sure that we hold a consistent shape to the wings the whole way through. This is a really forgiving design. When we shot the main episode, one of the wings were severely warped from the way I packaged it and shipped it. It just took a couple clicks of trim and it flew great. Alright, we're going to open this up again, and now you see that the wing is holding its form very nicely. That all comes with about 45 seconds of holding the glue joint down, so don't rush this part. Hum a song in your head. I like you are my sunshine. Alright, we're going to put 2 more beads of glue down and finish off this wing portion. We're going to put a bead of glue on the leading edge, and then once again 3 sections in the spar here. Plenty of glue in the glue gun. Nice healthy bead on the leading edge. I'm not worried about the center section because frankly there isn't much. Same process as before. Now we're going to fold this over. We're going to concentrate a majority of our pressure right over the spar here now. If you did your job, the wing should fit nicely all the way against the trailing edge against the table. About 45 seconds to a minute and we'll let it dry. We've had a lot of questions on the forums about why are our glue sticks white now, because in the past we actually pointed out that there was an AdTech glue stick that was multi-purpose and it was foggy and it didn't adhere well. That's been long fixed by AdTech, and they did a really good job responding quickly, and a lot of the great community members actually reached out to them. That started a process between AdTech technology but also Heigl adhesives. And Heigl adhesives was also kind enough to make us a special blended glue specifically for our foam board and our water resistant foam board. That glue has a lot of binders in it, and you also know it's very, very hard. That glue is actually milky white, and that's no problem whatsoever. It's a very good glue joint, and it works incredibly well, specifically on foam board, paper, and Dollar Tree foam board, Adams Ready board, all that stuff. Really good binders. It's available in our store. It's the exact same price as what you have at Walmart. The only additional cost you're going to have is shipping. Good indicator that you have a good glue joint and everything's firmly dried is when you lift your hands up, nothing moves. If you lift your hands up and start springing open, don't let it spring open, go right back down and hold it down again until it doesn't do that. If it does spring open, go back and apply more glue if you need, and then repeat the process. You want this to be a nice solid glue joint. Alright, we have a really nice looking little wing, but we have no dihedral. What dihedral does is it helps the plane soft right and gives it nice docile tendencies, specifically if it's a 3-channel airplane where you're only using elevator and rudder and throttle. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. First thing I want to do though is this should line up nicely with the spar that had creases underneath. So I'm just going to go ahead and help it along just a little bit more. And I'm not going to cut completely through the wing, but I'm going to go down and you're going to feel the paper resistance. We're just going to break the surface tension of that piece of paper. The reason that we're doing that is I want this wing to nicely fold up. Now whenever I pull the wing up, I'm going to be pulling from the portion that's parallel to the bottom of the table, just like you see here. We're going to do both sides of the wing at once because it's a small wing. It's very difficult to kind of do one at one time, one at the other. It's much easier if you use some heavy weights. To get our dihedral, we're going to hold down the center section and we're going to lightly bend this up. Now you shouldn't have too much resistance because we already went through with the razor blade and cast that through. We want to see enough that we can easily pull this up and slide this gauge under the flat section here without too much resistance. If there's too much resistance, extend it just a little bit more than that and you should see it soften up after a couple movements up and down. That feels really good. Same process here. We're not pushing so hard down that we bent the foam. We're just gently rocking it up and letting it kind of crush inside that foam just a little bit. We're going to clean up this edge with tape afterwards, so don't worry how it looks necessarily. A really handy tip if you're going to be building a lot of scratch build planes is to get some heavy blocks. In past builds you've seen us use 1, 2, 3 blocks. They're available at Amazon. It's actually a machining tool. They're quite heavy and they do a really good job weighting down things so then you can move things like the wings and hold it all in position. I'm going to use these 2 random blocks I stole from Chad Lewis. If you don't have that, you can use a tape dispenser, you can even use your transmitter, or you can just hold it with your hand. The biggest thing is set it up so you can actually leave it alone and not be tempted to jump on it too quickly. I'm going to take the tip of my glue gun, once again making sure I have plenty of hot glue. I'm going to push a nice bead of glue right down in, taking my time right over the center section because we need to get through a couple. And you're going to notice that kind of as I push that nozzle down, it opens up that crack even more. Once again, filling up that center nozzle. This will take a little practice. If you have glue globs on the bottom afterwards, don't worry. I'm going to go ahead and fold this up on both ends. I'll take my little blocks, weight it down. Don't worry, we have a couple minutes here. We're going to grab a little scrap piece of foam. Oh my gosh. Wipe off the excess. You can see we have a little bit of work time, thank goodness, because I just knocked this over 3 times now. There we go. You can see when something like the dihedral knocking off, we didn't have to panic. We had time to work with this. We got about 15 to 20 seconds to work with it. If God forbid something does go loose, simply put a little more glue on it. It's going to soften up the glue that dried, put it back in position, but give it a little bit longer to dry this time. Give it about 2 minutes instead of maybe 1.5 minutes. Just going to test this. We'll lift this up gently. And you're going to notice I can slide these in and out and the wing doesn't drop. That's a perfect indicator that you have a nice solid joint here. To clean up this edge, we're going to just simply take 2 thin pieces of tape. And I'll tape dispenser right here. Go right over the seams. Keep in mind we're going to be covering up our little reference points for our popsicle sticks later, so we're going to have to find those, but that's very easy. Mainly because it's clear tape. If only the real Pietenpol was able to be built so quickly. One final step that we want to do is just take our razor blade and follow these notches down and cut the space out that you see here. This is going to serve 2 purposes. This is going to be the notch that holds the radiator, but also the radiator gives it a really nice support, so if you do crash, it takes support from the fuselage and takes it up to it and takes some of the stress off of the popsicle sticks. We've actually cartwheeled this and it holds up really, really nice. Alright, at this point our wing is now done. We're ready to move on to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to assemble the main portion of your fuselage on your Pietenpol. We're going to show you how to do the A folds, the B folds, do your bevel cuts, and put it all together. For the fuselage main piece, we're going to only need about 4 pieces here. And that's going to be our power pod doublers, our lower portion, and our main fuselage portion here. Our next step that we're going to do is we're going to be removing foam from strategic locations to make a cavity that will help us fold the fuselage together. We're going to go ahead and do that right now and then show you the pieces. The pieces we're going to remove is going to be here, the edge cavity along each edges, all the little holes, and the edge of the paper here. There's a good rule of thumb with our designs. If you see a cavity or a score line that's about the width of the foam, generally that means it needs to be removed. It's important when we do these score cuts that you don't cut all the way through the piece separating it. Now if that does happen, don't worry, you can always use tape to reinforce it and put it back together. But one cool tip is by dulling the edge, the very tip of your razor blade, no matter what you use. And that can be done by rubbing it against a sanding block or just take it down to a piece of concrete and dragging it about 10 times at about a 45-degree angle that you see here. That's going to remove the very tip of your razor blade and make a nice blunt edge. We can then take a scrap piece of foam, like this wing gauge, and cut through it. And what we should see is it'll cut all the way down, but it'll ride along the paper and make a very nice clean edge. Once you're happy with that, you're going to take that same angle and go along with each piece and drag it through. You want to cut as close to the paper as possible without going through the paper. Doing this dulling technique is going to help you to be able to go all the way down to the paper without cutting through. Now this plane's a little bit more complicated in my opinion than things like the Tiny Trainer, but it could be a good first plane if you're really into civil aircraft. Easy way to remove the foam now that you've done a score cut is to fold it at a 45 degree, and in this case we have quite a long edge. I'm going to raise this up, use my fingernail, and just gently roll it off. For the fuselage, we can just pop these pieces out here completely, close that cavity. I can fold this over 180 degrees. Just take the tips of our fingernails and just rock it out. This water resistant foam is made wonderful by Adams here. We had a really good relationship collaborating with them, and I really feel good about this material. This material can get wet and you can dry it off and it won't warp. Really great for those humid days and those early mornings when you're flying. It does stick a lot more aggressive than the white Adams Ready board that you find in Dollar Tree or Dollar General. So you may find that there's a little residue in here. Just simply take your razor blade and just scrape it off. The cleaner you get these cavities, the better your plane's going to go together. We're going to open this up, and I actually forgot to do a score cut there. If I want to build really fast, what I'll oftentimes do is take a single edge razor blade, do the dulling on both tips, put a piece of tape on it indicating that's my score blade, and then I can reach it anytime I need, and then keep this blade ready for cutting through. Alright, I've removed all the cavities and peeled the foam away from the sections I need. Once again, go ahead and feel free to pause this and study it very carefully. The pod doublers, we only have the center cavity. The fuselage, we have our folds. And we also have some reliefs pulled out here where it's going to fold over and cover up that ugly edge on the front, making it look even more finished. If your model looks like this, we're ready to move on to the next step. Let's go ahead and put this aside for right now and put our attention towards these pod doublers because we're going to be using these the quickest. This portion that you see here is actually going to fold right in the middle. Now this isn't necessarily needed to hold our power pod, but it does make it much stronger. And I want this to be able to take a hit, especially since a lot of people are possibly going to be learning on that. So you can see we're just doing a quick test fit here, making sure everything lines up. You're going to see 3 consecutive score cuts. Once we glue this together, we're going to use a ruler, we're going to finish this off. The reason I didn't do that, it'd be very hard to get this perfect without this meat in this area here. So let's go ahead and take our glue. I'm just going to put a very thin drop right in the middle. This doesn't need to be super strong, but favoring the edges, we're just going to go ahead and put this down a little bit on the top. Make sure we're going to be using a nice sharp razor blade so we can cut through that glue if we need to. And we're going to center it perfectly on all 4 edges. Whenever we do any kind of fold overs, anything like that, I always want to practice it. Never take that for granted. Making sure we're happy with the fit. And that looks really good. Same process as before. I'm just going to put a really thin little tack glue strip right there. Glue on the back. And then really favoring the very edges here. It's going to squeeze out and that's okay. Let's go ahead and just put a little bit back here too. Pulling it over. Wiggling it around. And once again, making sure that it's nice and flat. For taking it to the table and pressing firmly. Alright, our doubler's now done. We can go ahead and take a steel ruler or a triangle and we can go ahead and finish our cuts. I'm going to go ahead and use this clear triangle, or square is what they call it. That way you can kind of see where I'm holding on the edges. I want this line to project all the way to the very tip. You should be about 1 millimeter from the edge when you go out from there. It doesn't have to be absolutely spot on, but try to take your time and get as close as possible. Now keep in mind that this razor blade edge here is not going to go through the very bottom piece of foam. That's okay, we can go ahead and flip it over and finish it off. Don't try to take it in one slice. Same technique with balsa wood. Whenever you cut it, multiple passes will get you a very nice straight true edge. Get through that glue if it's a little over squished. Keep it perpendicular all the way to the bottom. Once again, we're going to line this up. Put my razor blade as a good reference. There we go. Always make a habit if you can to cut away from you. And we'll just finish this off on this side here. Did this right, this should pop out nice and neat. What you're going to notice is that your powder pod is going to nest in this section that you see right here, nice and even. It's going to hold it very securely, but the most important part, it's going to actually help our barbecue skewer stay nice and true and squeeze on this powder pod properly. So that looks really good. You can just put this to the side, put our powder pod out of the way. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards this section right here. You can see this cavity line right here. We're going to line this section up right here exactly with that cavity and keeping our lines all even. And these ends should end pretty close to the very tip. This paper is actually going to wrap around this and cover it, so don't worry about how it looks right now. That looks really good. Same process as before. I'm going to favor this area because there's no hole there, so if I put it on this glue, it's just going to make a bump right there. Favoring the very edge, nice and slow. A little glue around here. We don't have to put a ton of glue on there. In this case, the strength is in the foam, not in the glue. Hold that down nice and firm. This is going to make the nose of the Pietenpol incredibly strong. So that way, if you do, God forbid, have an impact, all the load is transferred right to this back piece here, and it keeps the fuselage from crumpling up very easily. We do the same thing on the tiny trainer as well too, and it's worked very, very successful. Okay, now that I have that, same process before, I could take my little razor blade, this time carefully using the side of our wall as a guide here. Just carefully go out and cut the piece out. Our next step is to perform an A-fold. Now I gotta apologize, I did not put the A-fold marking on here because I didn't want it confused with this. We're simply gonna lift this up and over. But truth be told, even if you did it this way and did it wrong, it still wouldn't affect the build of the plane. So we're just gonna fold this right over on the top as you see here. If you don't know what A-fold and B-fold is, A-fold is where the side plates are above the bottom plate, and B-fold is where the side plates are beside the bottom plate. Whenever we speak of A-folds and B-folds, it's always in reference to the top or bottom plate relative to the side plates. So we're going to hold this up. We're really happy, nice and 90. Once again, these blocks are really handy. You can kind of hold this in there and walk away and forget it. We're going to put a little bit of glue, don't need a ton, right in this cavity, favoring most of it on the side of the side plate. In this case, since it's hot, I'm just going to move this in here and let it rest. If any glue squeezes out, you can always take a scrap piece of foam and reopen that cavity. You're going to notice that there's an indent here and here. That's because popsicle sticks are going to slide right in this cavity in later steps. Give us a good 45 seconds to dry. Alright, we have our 90 degree. This is our main bulkhead former. Everything is going to kind of come up here and help us square against it. Alright, we have our 90 degree. This is our main bulkhead former. Everything is going to kind of come up here and help us square against it. Before we fold these side plates up against it, you're going to notice that there's a gap in the front, and these need to stretch forward. That's referenced by these sketch lines here, and on your plans it'll be your blue lines. Easiest way to go ahead and establish this fold is put your hands just ahead, and on our kits it should establish a crease there, just as you see. Bend this up about 20 degrees past where it needs to go, so when it relaxes, it's at the same angle. We're going to do this to all 4 pieces. If you have any difficulty like right there, you can take the blunt end and we can just continue that crease on. The benefit of these etch marks is that it tells you exactly where you want the foam to bend. If you're scratch building, you can take a straight edge and you can lay a straight edge down. Where's my little square? You can actually take the point of your barbecue skewer and just simply drag this over and establish a crease in that line. Back edge, once again, going about 20 degrees past where we need to. Same on there. You can actually hear that one crack and release. It's pretty cool. And now when we fold it up, you're going to see that it actually wants to go right where it needs to go. Now we're never going to do both sides at once. It's just too much going on. We want to take our time, make sure everything is 90 degrees. Now that we're happy with the fit, let's go ahead and focus on this portion here. Once again, we have a B-fold for this. So that means these side plates are going to go beside the bottom plate, as you see here. Ironically, when we flip this over, this bottom plate we're speaking of is actually the top plate. That's why B-folds and A-folds always refer to the top or bottom plate. We're happy with that. Whenever we do an A-fold or B-fold, we're going to focus the glue where most of the glue will matter, not where it's just going to get pushed around. So in this case, we're going to put glue on the doublers, Always check your glue level before you start squeezing glue. We're going to go ahead and lay a nice bead of glue down, skip over these joints. You can see I'm kind of focusing right where it just meets the paper, so it'll squeeze out a little bit. And on the top form of this bulkhead right here, we're going to put a little bead of glue. Down to the table. This is nice and flat. We're rotating up 90 degrees. And now our energy is going to be focused really on making sure the table's our friend. The side plate is going to go firmly against the table as we push it into the bottom plate. You can always lay this down nice and neat, kind of help us out. And what I'm really looking for and concentrating is where this foam bends. You can see my fingers on the outer extremities. And I'm looking at the creases here, making sure they're nice and tight. While this is drying, I'm also going to I can use this square block or I can use this triangle. And I'm going to be checking to make sure everything is 90 degrees along the whole fuselage. Do this when the glue is about mid-dry. Check one section, hold it, and then check the other section. If you're happy with that, you can hold it. Once again, the block's a really good tip. If you make sure everything is 90 degrees with every step, your plane's going to build much quicker, it's going to fly much truer, and look a lot nicer. So 45 seconds is done. Same process on the other side. Just to recap, we're going to check our glue level. I have just enough to get through this. I'm going to favor a lot of my glue up high. I'm going to come down low, kind of splitting the difference between the paper and the foam. Top side here, all the way on the bottom here. Once again, it goes down on the table, rotates up 90 degrees, making sure that we have the front nose and the back nose all done. Now we don't want to crease that or do any damage, so be careful with your pressure. This is your first build. Congratulations, number one, but also don't be discouraged if something doesn't look quite right. We really designed these planes to give you the best experience, even if it's a little crooked, even if it's a little bit off, or something doesn't quite line up. So don't get discouraged. What I'd strongly encourage you to do, finish it, get it in the air, and learn from your experience. If it flies crooked, you know, hey, I built the wing crooked, and that's going to help remind you next time to build the wing straight. These planes build incredibly quick, and you can also use the speedboat kit as a pattern and trace it out before you build it. And that way, if you need to build another one, you can. Or if you have a friend, you can get them in a hobby as well. You're going to see by using the table as our friend, we get really nice, clean, tight joints all the way around that are really nice and 90 degree perpendicular to the table. Once we're happy with this, we can go ahead and put our attention towards this bottom plate here. Alright, my sincere apologies here. When we did the main setup portion and we were talking about the different pieces to release, I left one out, and that was the very back piece that you see right here. So let's go ahead and take a moment right now to go ahead and remove this piece from your kit, or if you're hand cutting it, go ahead and cut this piece out if you don't have it already, and let's go ahead and remove the foam from the areas that we need. Once again, if it's a score cut about the width of the foam away from an edge, most likely it needs to be score cut all the way down to the paper and removed. We really try to design a lot of our plans around common rules, so that as you build, you're very comfortable with the techniques. And then we try to introduce one or two new rules in as we can to help build those bank of techniques. Our hope is that you'll actually fall in love with building, but also designing, and that you can use these common techniques to design around and get other people in the hobby. Along with this, we're also going to remove the paper. To remove the paper, just going to roll it up. If it sticks really, really good, just take it to the edge of the table and pull it off on the edge of the table. But in this case, it moves really nice. Just like that. Let's go ahead and put this aside. We're not going to need this for two more sections. We'll get ready for this. This is our rear portion, and as we pull this away, you're going to see it naturally takes a little bit of a bend already. That's good. We're going to slide this down all the way to the trailing edge, meets the trailing edge of the fuselage that you see here. It's exactly where we want it. Now that we have the fit and we're happy with it, we're going to apply glue once again, favoring mostly the side, but letting a little bit squeeze over on the paper to give us a nice glue joint. I like to stop just shy of the edge. We're going to take this down. I'm going to start a little on the wide area. I'm going to slide this down slowly while pushing it down. Careful because the heat will transfer through the paper. And once we have it at the trailing edge where we want it, I'm going to flip this over on its back. I'm going to rock it back and forth. Now I'm pinching down the back edge here just to make sure that the paper stays nice and firmly against it. Just rocking back and forth. Do this for about 20 seconds. One end to the other, one end to the other. And what we're doing is we're seating this edge down. You can see if we just pushed here, you'd have a very sharp edge. But by using the table as your friend and rocking it back and forth, we're actually giving nice even pressure on the whole bottom piece of the fuselage, and we have a nice sealed edge on both sides. The last step in building the main portion of the fuselage is going to be to fold over these little guys right here and make a nice sealed edge. If we need to kind of push in a little bit and just kind of work it, that's just fine. A little bit of glue. Because I don't want to stick my hand on that, I'm going to grab a piece of our scrap foam, fold it over, count to 10, and then with a little sweeping motion, pull it over. And what I like to do is slowly drag in while I'm putting pressure. That's going to pull this portion tight and also smear out the extra glue. As we learn more and more with our builds, we're trying to adapt more and more features that are going to cause people to say, where did you buy this? And then you get the honor of telling them, I built it. One more time. We're going to glue right on this bulkhead. Get a little sloppy with it because we want it to squeeze out slowly. We're going to grab this. We're going to fold it over with our scrap piece. Count to 10. And slowly work it over. And from that point on, we're dragging and pressing. Make this stroke last about 10-15 seconds if you can. If you have to start over again, that's fine. You just want to pull that nice and tight and give a nice sealed surface. Also, all that extra glue is going to be a nice protective covering. Later on, you're going to see that we cover up 90% of that. Congratulations, this portion of the main part of the fuselage is now done. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is installing the tail. In this step, we're going to cut the bevels for our tail assembly, install onto the fuselage, and also attach our tail skid. So for assembling the tail, we're going to keep our fuselage right by us because we're going to be using it in just a few short steps. If you haven't already moved the little cavity holes, go ahead and do so now. The first thing we're going to do on both our horizontal elevator and our vertical tail is going to be to open this up by putting it against the table and cracking the score line open. Now typically we'd have a bevel cut on the back edge, but whenever we have an elevator that's notched in like this, it's going to create a weak spot in this area here. So rather than doing that, we're going to do our bevel cut on the horizontal stabilizer. You can take this to the edge of the table, but I'm going to go ahead and just show you this technique kind of floating in the air to give you an idea. Once again, we're going to keep the blade at an acute angle just above the paper, keep our thumb far away, and slide it through. This is a common technique that we're going to use with every single build. There's lots of scrap foam around you right now, whether you buy a kit or you're scratch building. If you're worried about this, go ahead and practice over and over and over again. You're going to find in no time that you'll have no problem cutting a bevel cut that doesn't even need to go back. But if it is a little sloppy and you have a little restriction where you can't bend it all the way up, all you need to do is go back once again and just take a little thin slice and get closer to that paper. Doesn't have to look perfect, and don't get discouraged, especially if this is the first couple models you've done. This technique will come naturally to you very soon. I'm sure Bob Ross didn't get his happy little trees the first time. Alright, I have no problem moving this up. This one's good. Let's go ahead and do the same process. Anytime I can use a table as my friend, I'm going to do so. I'm going to put my 2 fingers down, lift up the elevator, crack that loose. There's not much meat in this area here, so I want to be very delicate. This time I'm going to cut the bevel cut on my movable rudder, not the vertical stabilizer. Same process as before. I still have times where I cut through the paper. Not a big deal. You can always repair it with tape if you have to. That looks great. Now you notice between the two steps, I cleaned up my surface, I felt the table to make sure there weren't any glue globs. A lot of time we're going to be pushing against the table. If you have little glue globs, you're going to go ahead and put dents in your foam. Also, I cleaned out a lot of my scraps, just keeping the biggest ones for squeegees. I'm just going to go ahead and take a piece right here. I'm going to do something called a hot glue reinforcement hinge. I'm going to take the tip of my hot glue, and I'm almost out. I'm going to have to change out my stick in a second. And I'm going to push the nozzle right down where the paper meets the foam and put a very thin bead of glue. Just as quickly as I put it down, I'm going to take a piece of scrap foam with a nice sharp angle. I'm going to scrape off as much of that as possible. Flip it over, scrape again. The goal here is to remove as much glue as possible and also press the glue that's remaining down into the foam and into the paper, creating a nice bond. This is going to make your plane last a lot longer and keep that hinge from fatiguing. The one thing I encourage you not to do is not to immediately go and move this shut. If you do, you may find that you glue your elevator shut. Give it a good 30-45 seconds, and you can also either dip your finger in water or lick the tip of it and run down, and that's going to kind of cure it and smooth it so it doesn't get tacky. Same process on the elevator. Nozzle right down onto the paper, very, very thin bead of glue. You barely need any at all. And then we're going to scrape off most of it. If your elevator was nice and free before you did this, and it isn't, most likely you have a glue glob right at the base of the hinge line in the paper that's causing that problem. Dip your finger in water, run it down, we're good to go. If you do have a glue glob, you can't find it, you can always recut that bevel cut, and your knife's going to find that ball up or build up for you. We're going to put the rudder aside for right now. We're going to focus on this tail. Bringing our fuselage back into the picture, this is the top surface of our elevator. We're going to want the top surface of our elevator pushed against the table so it exposes our hinge line. We're going to take the 2 notches on our fuselage here, and we're going to line them up here. With the fuselage upside down, you're going to see it just pops right in, easy as can be. To get better visibility of everything, let's go ahead and continue this score cut right here to the very edge. I'm just eyeballing this, keeping it parallel, and knocking it out. Now we can kind of look inside here, and look inside that gap, and make sure that this little notch here that's protruding forward lines up with that notch here. It tells us that our elevator is nice and straight. We also left these protrusions out here and here to help us kind of get a nice fit here. Now that we're happy with that fit, we're going to put glue on the lowers. Notice I'm putting a pretty healthy amount. Letting it bulb up, especially if it's a kit. It's going to be a little undercut, a little cupped out. That works in our favor sometimes because it gives us abilities to do some pretty unique techniques. Rock it back in. And we don't want to go 90 degrees from here, but what we do want to do is take our triangle and go 90 degrees from here. While we're doing that, we can look inside of our gap, and we can make sure that the little rudder slot is lined up perfectly with the elevator slot. But it has been about 45 seconds to a minute. You can see once again that this gap right here is what we were talking about, and it lines up beautifully, nice and strong. Our next step is to install our rudder. We're going to make sure we have our square close by, make sure everything's nice and free the way we want it. And we're going to take the very tip of this and we're just going to kind of pinch it, just roll it in just a little bit. That's going to help the rudder pass through the back portion of the fuselage and line up easier. You're going to see a gap right here. That gap is going to go right down in between. We're going to start it in the bottom portion that you see here. And we're going to both on top and bottom evenly distribute the load as we push this forward. Don't just do one or the other. And we'll just do a quick test fit. What we want is on the very bottom here, we want this portion to be flush, the very front of this to be just meeting in the fuselage, rolling off nice and easy. And we want to see this bottom elevated. Once we're happy with that fit, we can raise this up just a little bit, just enough to keep everything engaged right there. We'll take our glue gun. We're going to put a nice little bead of glue right down in there. We'll press it down in. Notice I'm pulling from the bottom as I pull it to push it down. Take a little scrap piece of foam, I can wipe off that excess. And now I'm going to put my energy and I'm going to put a little bit of glue on both sides here. This tail skid's going to take a tremendous amount of wear and tear, so might as well make it nice and hard. Anytime you're gluing close to the tail, be careful about how much glue you use, because an ounce of weight back here is going to be a lot more damaging than an ounce of weight up in the front of the nose because of the way CG is leveraged. While this is drying, let's go ahead and put this on the table, check for square. Notice I'm not pushing down against the table because otherwise I'm going to push that rudder up. That looks really good. If you're at all concerned, you can always go back with the hot glue and you can trace all these edges out and then wipe off the excess. Only do this step if you're willing to wipe off the excess, because if you leave that weight back there, it's going to be even more hard to balance the plane later. In the kit, you're going to have 4 barbecue skewers. We're going to use one portion of that barbecue skewer to glue this down in, and I'm going to leave this protrude about 1/4 of an inch or a centimeter from the back. I can take this and just roll it back and forth a couple times. I always like to preserve the tip of the barbecue skewer to be able to puncture the foam for later steps. Once we have that, nice thin little piece of glue or bead of glue on this. Lay this down. I like to kind of twirl it around a little bit, spread that glue out. If we have to, we can wipe off the excess. Kind of a fun little tip. If this is a little bit rubbery because of the hot glue, that's actually sometimes a little bit nice. It gives you a nice even break from the very back of the plane, so when you land and you plant your tail wheel, or your skid in this case, it'll cause enough drag and make you track nice and straight. In this portion of the build, we're going to show you how to install your servos, push rods, and control horns while keeping it all centered. For installing the servos and the push rods, we're going to need the following items. We're going to, of course, need our little control horns. The power pod's already been built. These are the two control horns fastened to the power pod. We're going to need our 2 thin push rods and our 2 centered servos. While we're at it, we're going to go ahead and peel the sticker on the opposite side of where the arm's deflecting. So the arm's pointing this way. We're going to go ahead and peel the sticker on this side here. The reason that we're prepping it this way is we want to go ahead and a nice clean surface, and we don't want to glue the servos down by the sticker. We want to actually glue the plastic. Go ahead and, if you have to, take some alcohol and wipe this clean so it's just bare plastic. And a really good technique to do is to take a razor blade and to scuff it up. This is going to give the ability for the hot glue to really bite into these servos, because once it's installed, it's going to be very hard to service these. Always keep our little servo centering tool. If you don't have one of these, they're only about $6–7 on our store, worth every single penny. I'll do that on the other side. Prepping things like this ahead of time will keep you from being delayed in future steps, but also keep you from neglecting them and just being in a hurry. There we go. Servos are now prepped. We're going to put our attention on the elevator. Now you're going to see that the elevator control horn slot is right here. We're going to use the tip of our push rod with the Z-bend pointing away. Just drag this back and forth in our kit. Make it so it doesn't have any resistance. Now that it slides nice and clean, we're going to pass this through, reach down and press it through the hole. There we go. Now before we press it all the way through to the front, let's go ahead and grab the hole from the outside here, pull it up, and let it sit right there. This is where we're going to take our control horn and we're going to pass it through so it locks on. We're going to carefully indent this into our cut, and we're going to focus on making sure that where the Z-bend is right above the hinge line. That's going to give us even deflection both up and down. Once we're happy with that position, we're going to put a little bit of glue in here. Keep a scrap piece of foam handy. We're going to press it down again in that slot that we just made. And then we can go on the top here and wipe off the excess. We're going to hold this in place, being careful not to move it, for at least 45 seconds. All your control for the elevator is going to pass through this push rod and control horn, so if it's a poor connection and you lose your elevator, you're not going to be able to fly up or down, and most likely the plane is going to crash. Alright, our minute's up. We can see that we have nice control deflection. The reason we have that drag is because this guy right here. We're going to go ahead and address that right now. Now on our store we have a really great Z-bender. It's a Z-bender I've been using for well over 10 years. It's about $20. If you're doing lots of scratch builds, it's a very easy way to get your Z-bends quickly and precise. But I'm going to show you a way that you don't need anything more than a pair of pliers and side cuts. Okay, if you look at your control push rod right here, right about in the center section is where we're going to want to make our bend. Reason being is I want this servo to be mounted right in the center. So I'm simply going to take this up, lightly bend it up, and right about the center, I'm going to grab it with the pliers. I'm going to bend it straight up towards me. So often a little bit of an angle, don't worry, it's okay. A little bit more. Now what you're going to see is you're going to see a 90-degree bend. Now that we have that 90-degree bend, I'll switch over to the blunt nose here. I'm going to grab that with about 2 millimeters of space, roughly the space that you would have going through the servo arm. I'm going to bend that 90 degrees toward the center of the fuselage. And this is what we call a modified Z-bend. I'm just going to take my cutters real quick. I'm going to cut it off about a 1/2 centimeter, 3-4 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, whatever you call it, just like that. This at this point is called a modified Z-bend. This is actually a really good technique if you're going to be removing your push rod and changing holes on your servo arm or your control horns. We want this to be sealed and held in tight. So I'm going to take these blunt nose pliers. I'm going to grip them directly overhead. And because this is passing through foam, I'm going to kind of brace it. I'm going to slowly rotate it 90 degrees. Now if you look closely, we have the same type of Z-bend, bent in the exact same angle we need to receive our servo. So let's go ahead and put our servo in now. Scratchy end towards the foam, leads pointing towards the front. We're going to lift this up. There's only one hole to go into. If you're using our electronic kits, these servos are included in it, and everything with your throws is just going to work out wonderfully. All right, I'm going to take this push rod. I got a hole right here. I'm going to rock this back and forth, flip it over on the right side until it hooks down into the servo arm. There we go. Now I've obviously moved it a lot, turned it, things like that. I'll just turn it out of whack. Let's go ahead and plug this back in. Once again, ground going towards the bottom. And then use our cool technique we discussed earlier about powering the servo. Remember, we can't put over 5 volts in this, so we only want to use one cell. That means we're going to keep the ground towards the bottom, use the bottom 2 legs, and only power at 3.7 volts from the balance connector. Turn it towards manual. That's center, or turn it towards center. Now it's centered up. With that plugged in, I can now slide this so it's perfectly level and glue it in place. Beautiful thing, even though you have linkage stoppers included in your electronics pack, let's not use them this time because if it comes loose, it's going to be very hard to tighten. So I'm going to leave this plugged in. I'm going to put a little drop of glue down, and I'm going to keep that square here just to my right handy, and we'll use that in a second. Nice drop of glue. I'm going to come from the bottom. I'm going to slide this right until we meet it. Notice I'm not loading up the wire with any extra stress. And now what I can do is while I'm holding it, I can make sure that this elevator is nice and flat. This is every bit as important as your control horn and push rod, so we're going to hold this for a good minute before moving on to our next step. We have our elevator solved. Now let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the rudder. Same process, the only difference now is this is vertical. I'm just going to pop this little guy out here to give us our cavity that we need to allow the control horn to move fully. Quick recap, there's our Z-bend end right there. That's going to face towards the outside. Pass this through. Find the corresponding hole. Pass that on through. Pull it up towards the top. And we're going to leave this portion in line with the hinge line. Take our last remaining control horn. Sometimes I pass these through and they're upside down. No big deal if they are. We're going to press it down in its cavity, give it a nice good test fit. Anytime you test fit the control horns, what we really want to focus on is where the hole of the push rod is. Should line up as close as possible to the hinge line. If it's backwards too far off, you're not going to get even deflection. That looks really good, so let's glue it in. Press that down, wipe off the back a little bit. And we always like to kind of just pinch it down in, hold it firmly in place for at least a minute. Minute's up. Let's go ahead and do our Z-bend. Once again, we're going to do a modified Z-bend and convert that into a standard Z-bend. Go ahead and take our pliers real quick. Going to rule right about the center. If it's a little off, don't worry. And once again, I strongly encourage you not to use linkage stoppers. You're going to save weight and save hassle in the future. Also, these little tiny servo arms aren't really made to take those huge holes very easily. It does include bulkier ones, but you're using the thin ones. We're going to grab it 2 millimeters up, bend it 90 degrees. And because we won't want this to ever slip out, we'll cut this and we'll rotate it 90 degrees to make a standard Z-bend. Grab it, Brace the wire so we're not damaging our fuselage. Bend it 90 degrees. You can see this one's kind of off in a 45. Don't worry about that at all. It'll be just fine. Okay, we have the scratchy side towards the foam. Both servo arms are pointing in. They have plenty of room. You can stick your finger down there. Life is good. Go ahead and lift this up. Pass it through. I think this right here is the hardest part, is just getting the wire to pass through that little tiny hole. Take your time, don't force anything. And keep that servo centering tool so you're not tempted just to rock it back and see, oh, that looks centered enough. Get it perfect the first time, then you'll never have to worry about it again. The planes I've flown only took 2 or 3 clicks of trim at the very most. One of them took none. Okay, so you see we're firmly fastened. You can see that the servo relaxes right here. This is going to be the motion we do it. We don't want to lift it way up or way down. We want it to be nice and even pressure. So there's our plane that we work on. Okay. Not taking any chances. We're plugging it back into the servo centering tool. Still have it powered from that battery. Once again, if you power this with more than 3.7 to 5.5 volts, you're going to damage your servo and possibly even your servo tester. There we go. We're all centered up again. Life is good. I'm just going to leave that centered up so it keeps me from moving it. Little drop of glue. If it works a little fast here, we'll drop this down in, let it relax. It'll naturally just push up against it. You gotta kind of smear that around, press firmly down, and then just kind of confirm that we have it right where we need it, right there. Give yourself a good minute, sing "You Are My Sunshine" 2 times in your head, and you'll be good to go. Alright, that didn't take too long. We now have our servos installed with our push rods, transferring the movement back. This is going to enable you to go left, right, up, and down. We're ready to move on to our next step. In this portion of the build, we'll be showing you how to fasten the Turtledeck and the formers, along with installing our cabanes and radiator. For our top formers and Turtledeck, we're going to need the following pieces. In this case, I'm going to be showing you how to assemble and install your dummy radiator. We have the optional former for if we're going to 3D print our radiator and engine. We'll talk about that shortly. And then we have our formers that we're going to need, along with our front guides for our cowling. So to prep these, we're going to go ahead and remove the foam here, pop out the holes, remove the foam here, leaving the paper on the back on both these sides. Let's go ahead and do that now. Same process as before. We simply fold it over. After scoring it, carefully remove it. Whenever I design these, I try to make it where we have like notches even across, so it's just a matter of wiggling them out. If you ever have to go back with a razor blade, that's fine too. Get that prepped. Anytime we can move and work off the table, it's not only safer, but it's going to give you better quality. And of course, we have our poster board over here. Well, I know we're all dying to see what this radiator looks like. Let's go ahead and put this together now. We're going to do just a quick test fit. Rock it over. And you're going to see it gives you kind of the indent that you're looking for. You can take a piece of felt if you want, or color this black before you fold it over. Make this look like little radiator louvers. Flat black works really nice. When this is painted up black, it's just going to give you the depth of field. This little hole is for a crinkly straw. If you wish to put it in, you can actually make a fake radiator hose. It all depends on how creative you want to be. Let's go ahead and put a little glue. Then we're going to focus our glue on this back portion right here. Flip it over. Press it firmly down against the table, making sure our top edge is 90 degrees. You're going to notice that there's only one tab on this, and that's good. That's exactly how we want it. Just make sure the edges are flush. This is 90 degrees, and then you have your exposed tab about the width of the foam on the very bottom. Go ahead and put this to the side. We have 2 formers that are the exact same size, so we'll go ahead and put those in right now. First one, I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the very back edge on the bottom, and that's going to go on the back of the double slot in the front. The radiator piece is going to slide in right in front of it, just like that. The next full length piece is going to be on the very back. We'll go ahead and put our glue on it. So this next piece, after we have the glue on it, we're going to place it in the next slot back. Kind of working from front to rear. The next piece has a unique slot. I went ahead and made this slot smaller so you can only put it in one location. Any other location is going to feel too big and not look right. That's going to be this slot right here. After a quick test fit, we're going to put glue on the lows. Anytime you want, you can always come back and reinforce with this. But once you put the paper on this in the poster board, you're going to see it gets very strong. We're going to center this up, making sure that the two slots on the left and right are exposed and not covered. Our final former, you're going to notice, is actually smaller than the rest, and that's going to be where the pilot sits, and it's going to be his backrest. And that's going to meet perfectly right back here. After test fit, a little bit of glue. Now this is very exciting. We started with about 2/3 of a glue stick. One glue stick. And I'm yet to have to put the second glue in. Anytime that you can stretch your glue as far as possible, you're not only saving yourself money in glue, but you're also saving weight. Taking one stick and practicing on foam board, pulling your beads out, not put too much, too little. It's going to give your builds better looks and also save you a lot of weight, which will give you better performance. Alright, it's always easier if you're going to do any painting details, go ahead and do that now. We have really good paint videos. In this case, I'm just going to be building it as a plain brown airplane. We'll be painting it later. We'll make that Chad Lewis's problem. Let's go ahead and glue this in. One quick test fit. You're going to notice that the edges all line up very nice and even. I'm going to focus now the glue on this back side, along with a little bit down in the cavity. So put a little bit of a healthy amount in, that's just fine. We can wipe that off. Don't get a blister because of me. Use a scrap piece of foam. I have a lot of little tabs here because I really want everything to line up square for you. So you're going to notice little tabs, little reliefs cut. This is all to make the build experience better. If you're scratch building, don't be discouraged about getting all these exactly right. They're really meant to make the experience as good as possible, but if it's a little off, as long as you look at the edges we're lining up with, it's going to be great. Now if we did the 3D printed, rather than putting this piece on, we would have put this piece on. And you notice if I line it up, it's identical. The only thing is we're omitting this portion of the radiator. That's because the awesome radiator designed by Dan Sponholz would literally sit down in here. All we need to do is if we wanted to put the 3D printer on with that former, we just cut the poster board away, making that pocket open. We'd slide the 3D printed radiator down in and glue it in place. Alright, our last two pieces are going to be these guys here. Now you're going to see that the paper's done. And that's just to cover up this portion here. So as we slide this in for a quick test fit, a little bit of pressure pops in. You notice that this paper goes all the way down and covers it. Two reasons for this. We want the power pod to slide nice and easily in and out. I don't want you guys getting paper cuts. And also this will help serve as an alignment tool to keep this just in line with this and not let it flow too easily. That looks really good. Now that we have that former, we know where we need to put the glue. Finally ready for more glue. Quick tip, if you just took the head of your glue gun nozzle, melt it a little bit, not too much, you can glue it right to the other end of your glue stick. Give it 10 seconds, you're ready to feed. Alright, I'm not going to worry about this right now. I'm going to put my glue on the very bottom and on the very back. I'm going to slide it in place. Whenever you do a test fit, it gives you a little bit of muscle memory. You know exactly what you need to do to get it lined up. And now I'm kind of pulling down. I'm putting downward pressure by pulling on that while making sure this is lined up on both axes. Give this about 45 seconds to dry, and when it's done, we can open up this flap, squeeze a nice healthy bead of hot glue down, reach over to our little scrap pile we're accumulating, and press it down into place. Whenever we're gluing this in, it's always nice to kind of hold it for about 10 seconds, and then drag in the direction that you want the glue to squeeze out, but also the edge you want to feather it into. Alright, same process on the other side. Quick test fit, gotta keep me honest. That looks good. Thin bead of glue on the surface. thin bead of glue in the back. As before, we're going to press it down into place, making sure our edge is lined up with the very edge of the cutout that we just did. And press firmly all the way back. 45 seconds, and the glue should be dry. Let's finish this off by lifting up our flap, put a nice healthy bead of glue down in there. Doesn't have to be perfect. We'll squeeze most of it out anyway. Let's take our little scrap piece once again. A little rocking pressure, work that glue down to get it nice and smooth. And after about 10-15 seconds, we can pull it away and it should stay. All these techniques can be practiced with scrap pieces of foam. We really want you to enjoy your experience, whether you're scratch building or buying one of our speed weld kits and supporting us. So go ahead and take that time to use your extra pieces in between steps, practice different techniques. I gave this nice ample time to be able to dry thoroughly. So let's just go over it and look at it one last time. We have our smallest former here on the very back. We have our special notch former with the two wings on it where the struts are going to come up through. Then we have two identical formers along with the radiator former and our front guides. We're going to go ahead and shape this because on the Pietenpol, the poster board is going to wrap up around to kind of emulate what the cowling looked like. I don't want a blunt edge on the very front. I want this poster board to naturally kind of guide around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a light bevel about at a 45 degree, leaving about half the width of the foam. And then slowly just kind of rock that back. Doesn't have to be perfect to match up with this former right here. You'll see that it's notched in where the radiator kind of sits around. That's how the scale one did, but it's also going to hold our poster board down. So go ahead and do that on both sides. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean. Just give it a nice little bevel so when we roll that poster board over, it's going to look good. Same process here. Sometimes we have to work away, just use a little saw motion. And you got it. This foam also crushes really nice, so you can kind of mold it with your hands if you need to. Alright, whenever we do poster board, we always work from the back going forward. That way the air pressure going over it doesn't catch under it. It also looks more aesthetically pleasing when you look at it from the front of the plane towards the back because the seams hide each other. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now you have two surfaces on your poster board, and if you're scratch building at home, you should have one direction that the grain bends really nicely and the other where it's more rigid. When it bends really nicely, you know that the grain is running this way. When you cut your poster board out with your patterns, make sure the grain is running horizontally so that it bends around the formers really nice. If you bend your paper and you notice it's crinkling a lot, it's most likely because you cut it in the wrong grain. Just go ahead and cut another one. So let's give this a quick test fit. We're going to ultimately have this sit right on the very bottom. Don't push it under the tail. Center it up, and we'll just wrap it around. Take a moment to kind of look at that, make sure you're happy with it. You should see it be fairly parallel on the top longeron, and it is. So before we move any further, we're going to put a nice bead of glue on the very back, and all we're going to do is let this set right on the edge. We're going to split the difference. The middle is right in the center. We're going to split the difference right there. Give that about 45 seconds. What we're doing is we're locking this in place so when we bend this around, this doesn't move on us. It's going to make our job a lot easier. Now I'm bringing into the picture the steel ruler here. We can also use our triangle. Either one's going to work just fine. The biggest thing I don't want you to do is try to use your hands because the heat's going to transfer through the paper and it could possibly burn you. You can also use a table as your friend, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Let's go ahead and put a little drop of glue on the very top here, and we'll pull that taunt. The easiest way to make sure that we have it nice and even, we can kind of give it a little bit of pre-configured curve. I want this to be nice and centered up. Now, I'm holding this curve. I'm really happy with how it fits on both sides. I'm looking at both sides, making sure it's dropping down even. It looks really good. Where my back fingers are, I'm just going to hold that. I'm going to let this end hop up. Now I'm going to take my glue gun, and I'm not sliding the paper down. I'm holding it firmly against it. Don't put too much pressure and wrinkle your foam. I'm going to put a nice bead on this half and keep my nozzle right at the very top lip. And now I'm just going to end it right here. I can take the steel rule, or in this case I can take this square. I can press it down into place and hold it there. In previous builds, you've also seen me roll it over on the table and hold it over. This is such a small plane, it's easy to do in your hand, but you're welcome to use that technique as well. I'll show you how to do that with the other side. Give it about 45 seconds to dry. Now we have the other side, same process as before, but what we're going to do is we'll use the table as our friend, and we'll roll this around and hold it against the table. The reason I didn't do this right off the bat is we have this big radiator out in front. It's a lot easier just to use a ruler or a square as our friend to be able to hold that in place. In this case, we can get around it. Alright, same process as before. Nice healthy bead of glue in the undercut area of that former. And then a very thin, even bead of glue at the very top lip. Keeping in mind, if you put too much, it'll squeeze out, potentially glue it to the table, and we don't like that. I'm going to right back on table, we're going to kind of move down in motion, put pressure on that. Table takes a lot of abuse. Anytime you can build with friends, I'd strongly encourage you to do so. The conversations you have, the laughs, the memories, and also the help will last with you a lot longer than this foam board airplane. This is a really great project for parents and kids as well. We got both sides of our turtle deck on the back fastened. You're going to notice that we have some gap here. Every build is going to be a little bit different, especially if you're scratch building it. So I made this a little bit long on purpose, and now we can go ahead and cut it down the length. Easiest way to do that is with a razor blade. All we need to do is just pop it in just ahead of that former, ride it down nice and flush. Then with a gentle rocking motion, we're just going to follow that former all the way down, keeping our thumbs and fingers away to the very base of the plane. You can delicately put a little score line. If you have a nice sharp new razor blade, it'll probably cut through the very first time. A little score line, just continuing that line. Don't worry if you have a little gap there. Once you paint it, no one ever sees it. That looks really nice. Let's just get that one little edge that I punctured through off. Alright. That's the backrest for the pilot. That's where you guys are going to sit. Let's go ahead and put our attention now in the main cockpit area. We're working from back to front, so our next spots are the passengers. I'm using the nice doll side, which is this side, because it takes paint easier. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit. We're going to butt this right up against the back, and you're going to notice I have notches or little tabs that you ripped off are centered, and that way you have a nice point of reference for you. When we put this on nice and centered, we should have it where it meets almost to the millimeter right along the side. Now we have two cockpits. And as you can see, we still have an opening, so if you need to service the servos, you can do so. Alright. So I'm just kind of holding this, same process as before. We're finding our even spacing. I'm looking on the Londron, seeing it's even here and here. And you just kind of put your head over it, look at both sides. Once you're happy, you can do the same process as we did before. Just hold that back edge open up the front, and we'll just work one half at a time. We'll put 3 beads of glue down the formers. Start with the formers first. They'll hold the heat the longest. Keep it off that flat area there. And then a nice thin bead of glue really close to the top all the way to that former. Pull it over. Keeping those fingers on that back edge still. We can use the square as our friend and hold that in place. Gonna have a little bit extra here. No worries, we'll cut that off in just a moment. One side's done, very simple. 45 seconds later, we're gonna go to the other side. We can use the table as our friend, but I just prefer to use the square in this case. A little bead at the very, very bottom. Once again, we're keeping glue off of that flat edge right there. That's where our struts are gonna go through it. Roll it over, down towards the bottom. Get a little bit off. Okay, we can cut this flush, or we can just tack it down. I'm going to choose to cut it just behind so it blends in with that line. Now, when we first started flight tests, we had lots of different techniques, and as we find out better or we get suggestions from the community, we adapt them. So if maybe you started with one of our planes 40 planes ago, and it's like, this is a different technique, and for instance, we used to do a hinge with a piece of tape. That was very common back in the day. Now we have more techniques. Choose the one that works for you that you like the most. It'll all work. Let's go ahead and cut this side off. There we go. It's looking more and more like a Pietenpol with every step. This last portion is probably the most challenging, and it's for our front nose, because we're actually going to be creasing this and kind of forming this. So I want to go ahead and give a little bit of pre-roll to this, just to let it start taking its form now. Just kind of rolling it over, give it a nice edge to it, making sure our grain's going the right way. And we're going to go ahead and do a test fit. In a test fit, we're going to slide this in, and we have a relief cut on the back of our hinge that's going to naturally hold it there anyway. We're going to position this and give us enough ample room where the back edge of this is just at the back of the radiator, like that. Once we're happy with that motion, we'll take a nice piece of scrap foam, keep that by us, or we can always come back with our triangle. We'll put a bead of glue down, careful not to burn your thumb. Same process as before, but now we know exactly where we want it to go. We want the back edge just in that groove. We're going to line this up just perfectly with the edge, as you see here. We can take our square if we want. All we're doing is we're letting that, especially if it's a speedboat kit, we have a nice little lip that we're gluing it on, and we're not trying to bend it over immediately. We're going to let this firmly glue for at least a minute before we wrap it down, because we don't want this to change any shape. When our minute's passed, you can see why the reason why we were bending the head is we're going to pull this all the way down nice and tight. We want this to keep its shape here. Just a little bit released at the end. We can adjust that later. All right. Let's bring either our square or our steel rule into play. And all I'm going to do is with this pulled down firmly, I'm going to project a forward line. The reason why we gave you rectangles pieces of poster board here is we want you to have plenty of room to be able to cut material off. So just follow through the steps, and I promise it'll look good when you're done. We have this. Let's get my thumb a little bit cleared away there. Very, very light score cut. One, usually on the second one, if you have a nice sharp razor blade, you're through. And now we can put our attention right at the very back here. I'll just leave my razor blade right there. Now it's just a matter of just really connecting the two dots. Just roll it down. Doesn't have to be perfect. Once again, once you paint it, you really won't see it. If it's a really big gap, you can always cut it up, cover it up with tape. And once again, if this is your first speedboat kit, first kit, just get through the build and get it in the air. Don't worry about it looking perfect. This is your sacrificial plane. I promise you'll come back and build another one and it'll be 10 times more beautiful. Alright, that looks good. That's exactly what we want. We'll lift up this edge. We're going to favor the glue on this side here. And then, as we've done in the previous 3 steps, bead of glue. I have a feeling I put a heavy bead of glue there, so I bet you it's going to squeeze out and make a little bit of a mess, but we'll see. I'll use the steel rule for that. Alright, here we go. We're down, slowly pulling away. Hold it there for about 15-20 seconds, maybe even more. One side's done, it's firmly glued. Of course, I did squeeze over a little bit of glue. Got a little bit of tear right there where we kind of took off the outer surface paper. No worries, it'll look great when we paint it. Alright, the front portion here, we're going to go ahead and fold this over first. Don't worry about the top edge. Just fold it over 90 degrees and bend it forward. Once you have that edge folded, we're going to go back. Now we're going to tuck this under, and we're going to do that exact same motion. So it looks something like this. Just kind of mold it with your finger. Ironically, when this cowling was made with a real airplane, you'd oftentimes see creases in the metal just like you see here. So just fold it over, tuck the edge in, fold it over again. It's like you're wrapping a little Christmas gift that flies. Once you're happy with that, give a nice little bead of glue. Make sure you have some scrap foam handy. Tuck it in, tuck it over, hold it down with the scrap foam. Now if you see here, we have what looks like it would have been a very complicated piece to cover or poster board. It actually is very strong, very easy. Just 3 simple steps. We're going to do the exact same process now on the other side. Alright, just for a recap, kind of pre-bend, roll this around, make sure your grain's right, give it a nice curve that you see here. Just telling the paper what you want it to do. Stay disciplined, do that test fit, make sure that we can line this up with the outer edge of the paper. The very tip goes all the way in, we leave all that excess to cut off later. Then we're going to glue it right on this edge, flush right here. We're happy with it. Down goes the bead of glue. And we start our magical timer of 45 seconds when this is put into place. Go right down level with this. We'll hold it down with a piece of scrap if we have to. Overshot my target just a little bit. There we go. Once again, I'm not trying to establish the bend. I'm just establishing the glue joint before we bend it over to keep everything nice and clean. Our glue joint's done. Once again, the very edge of the glue joint's lining up with our former here. Let's go ahead and start bending our poster board down, establishing how it's going to look, making sure we're happy with it. Once we're happy, we're going to hold that tension of the angle that we like, keeping it nice and tight. I love these little steel rulers that are in our crafty kit because you can bend them. Check that line over. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then don't take anything with one bite. 1, 2. These are Japanese blades. You can see I could have had it in half. Okay, there we go. We're lined up. Razor blade reference right there. Now I can just connect the dots. Just line that right up. Get my thumb out of that picture. Right to the bottom. There we go. There we go. Okay. Same process as before now. We'll kind of open this up, give ourselves plenty of room to glue. Nice bead of glue here. I won't go so crazy this time and put too heavy a one on there. Pressing down. Covered up one of my holes a little bit, but that's no big deal. You can also, with your extra glue, you can kind of work this down in there, get your joint nice and cleared. Hold it in place, it'll dry. Look just like a panel line. Alright, just like wrapping a gift on the very front, we're going to first fold this around, not worry about this angle. 90 degrees. You should have just enough excess if you lined it up like we told you earlier. And we're going to fold that end in. Then fold it over again. Just like that. Okay, open it up. Make sure you have your scrap foam handy. Nice little healthy bead there. It's going to have to do a lot of work. Down goes the top. Around. Hold it in place. If it's hot, use a scrap piece of foam. This is really exciting. This is the very first open cockpit design that we've done where we've used something like barbecue skewers, things like that, with the exception of the baby blender, but we had no center cabanes. We're going to use popsicle sticks for the center cabanes that are going to come up through and hold the wing on. This plane is incredibly strong, and even though it's open cockpit, it's well braced. You're going to be able to take a few hits with it with no problems. So this is really exciting. For the next step, we're going to go ahead and put our cabane struts in, and that's going to be holding the top wing on. So it's really important that we look at the inside etch guides that are inside here. You're going to notice on our speedboat kit, we have etchings that look just like a popsicle stick, just a touch bigger, and that's because I want you to be able to see all the way around it, just enough to be able to get it all lined up. The better you do this process, the more even your wing's going to be, and slapping the wing on the top is going to be a real pleasure rather than a real chore. Let's go ahead and first find out where these are going to pop through. Well, we're going to work on the front because that's the easiest. We're going to slide our popsicle stick through, come right to the paper, and you're going to see it's very easy to see where it is. Maybe hard on the camera, but if you put your finger down, you're going to feel that. Go ahead and press against the paper and give it a nice defined little dimple. You see that there? Once you have that dimple, you already know that that's the very center of it, and you see the inside edge. Take your sharp razor blade. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but go ahead and cut the width and the depth of the popsicle stick. very, very carefully, like so. Now if we want to, we can actually take it the other way now, and we can rock that in and press it down. And now we're going to go right back into our line, and you can see now where the popsicle stick needs to line up. Right there. Let's go ahead and put a bead of glue down right in this joint. And I'm going to start most of it up at the top because unfortunately when we slide this through, a lot of it's going to get pushed down. So keep that scrap piece of foam by you to kind of smoosh it in. Slide it in one more time. Right through the bottom. I'm kind of pulling out. I'm going to go over the limits. I'm going to pull back just a little bit and line it up with my gap. Now I can take a scrap piece of foam. I can kind of smush it in there. I'm going to hold it in place. The most important thing is not necessarily whether it's tilted front or back, although you want it perfectly vertical. Line it up with the radiator as much as possible. Little back's okay because when you glue this in it may tend to go back, but you really want it vertical from your longerons. The most important thing with this is the depth and making sure that the cabanes are parallel with each other. So when we put our second one on, we're really going to be looking at this one to make sure it matches up as nicely as possible, both being depth and parallel. We're going to use a table for that. Alright, that's dry. Same process as before. We're going to rock it in, take it all the way to the paper. Kind of use our finger to find out where the edge is. Let it make a dent so we know where to rip it. We're going to take that dent and cut our opening. Doesn't have to be perfect. Slide it in. Now that we have the two, you're going to see very quickly it's very easy to make sure it's level this way. And also, if you lay it down on the table, you'll be able to see exactly how much ahead of the table it is, gap-wise. Alright, we like it there. We can mark it with a pencil if we want, but I'm just going to go ahead and put hot glue down, and ironically, you can see that it's exactly where we need it to be inside those lines. Just pull it out just a little bit. Nice healthy bead of glue. Push it back through. Kind of spreading that glue out, pulling it over. Get it back lined up. Nice and parallel. There we go. I'm just taking my time to make sure these are parallel and about the same height. After 45 seconds, we're going to go to the other side. Now this one's a little bit harder because it's actually captive on the bottom. So all we need to do is when you take it to the point where it bottoms out and not push any further. We can always drive it in further, but we don't want that. We're going to cut this hole without pushing the popsicle stick through. We're just going to feel around and kind of rock it right where the former goes. And that's going to create a little mild crease that's going to tell us exactly where we need to cut. So we'll cut one. We're going to cut our hole about the width of the popsicle stick. Let's give it a test fit. Popsicle sticks are one of my favorite materials. They're incredibly strong and light, and you can use them from anything from bracing to details like you see here. So I let that go down in. You can see if I go on the bottom here and look in here, you see my etch marks. I'll just need to go just a little bit more. You can see I can guide this down all the way and line it up with the line. That looks really good. Just taking this in and out is going to be a little bit difficult. I'm just going to slide this out a little bit. I'm going to focus a bead of glue, keeping it away from that push rod. Just drop a couple drops down in there. Now I can wiggle this down in. Oh, it doesn't look strong. When I wipe it with a scrap piece, it's going to push it in and make a very strong joint. We can do this on both sides. Same process as before. We're going to find that edge. There it is. Cut the groove. Alright, last popsicle stick. Soon to become a Cabane strut. We're going to slide that down in. If you have any glue globs that are kind of restricting your way, go ahead and use a remaining piece of your push rod wire or nozzle and get that out of the way. There we go. As before, we can kind of adjust. We have to move it up, down, left, right. We're really working off the other piece now. Getting it close as possible, putting it on the table, making sure that the space is even on both sides. That looks really good. The strength is going to be there whether it's crooked or not, but aesthetically, it's always nice to be able to have that. Just going to drop some glue down in here, cover it up. You see, I'm not really stressing about how everything goes together. These kits should not be stressful for you. It should be fun. We're going to let that dry, and we're ready to move on to the next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to install the landing gear flarings, and also the lower belly. For assembling the landing gear, we're going to get the following pieces. We're going to get our landing gear wire, our left and right landing gear flares, our bulkhead that we're going to fasten our landing gear to, and we're going to bring back the front piece of the bottom plate because we're finally going to get to install it. Let's go and take our wire and just drag it through this and open up that cavity so it'll easily glide in. Once we've done that, we're going to measure the middle. Now this is 15.5 inches. If I flip it over and give you the centimeters, it'll be roughly, looks like 39 centimeters. We're going to bend the wire as close to half as possible. If it's a little off, don't worry, because we're going to cut off the excess. So half of 15.5 is 7 3/4. Right there. We're going to grab our pliers and we're going to bend to 90 degrees. We can bend a little bit over and just slowly open it up until the shape of the wire matches the shape that's been laser cut into our bulkhead. Right there. So let's go ahead and just give it a quick test fit. We'll slide one side in and then the other side. That's the exact motion we're going to want to use when we put the glue down. So let's go ahead and carefully remove it without damaging the bulkhead. We'll take our hot glue gun. We have plenty of hot glue. This is only the second stick that we put in. Press a nice bead of glue down in the middle. Then press it in. We can follow up with another bead on the very top of it now, and then take a scrap piece of foam and press the glue in and wipe off the excess. Give this a good minute to dry. While that's drying, we can put our attention towards the fuselage. Make sure we keep our servo wires nice and clear so we don't have to worry about cutting those accidentally. We're going to go ahead and put a 45-degree bevel and just kind of lightly cut this in to the point where it just meets the outside of where the laser cut is. This is also going to be indicated on your plans as well. All we're doing is keeping the landing gear wire from having to cut anything. With the smooth portion of the bulkhead facing forward, we're going to do a test fit. Before we do that test fit, let's go ahead and get our wires out of the way. We'll just pass them through the top of the fuselage. So with the bulkhead going right by our little cuts that we made, we're going to drag it all the way down. And what we should see is the bulkhead going in about the width of the foam that you see right here. We're going to keep our bulkhead parallel with the popsicle sticks that we glued in earlier. This is going to ensure that it's nice and vertical. Once we're happy with that fit, we can rock this forward just a little bit. Place a nice healthy bead of glue on both sides. And then slowly rock it back up to vertical. You're going to notice when you put the bead of glue in, it rocks even easier, so you'll have easy time to maneuver it in place and get it nice and parallel with the popsicle sticks. If the glue is a little excessive, we can always come back with our scrap pieces of foam and wipe off the excess. I'm just going to redistribute that on the other side. We're going to give this about 45 seconds to dry. While this is drying, we can put our attention towards the fake landing gear pieces. On a typical Pietenpol, there's a couple different landing gears you can do, but they always had a very iconic kind of a triangle shape. So what we have here is what would be more like what you'd see with the wooden split axle gear, but it also works good if you paint it to make it look like the other conventional crossbeam gear. We're going to cut a 45-degree bevel on the side that has the 2 score cuts. You can see you don't have to worry about getting it perfect. You can always pass through a couple more times. There we go. And then we're going to do the opposite side. Always make sure you cut your bevel on the side with the score cuts. Let's go ahead and also just kind of give a very careful score cut, being careful not to cut it in half. At this time, this should be thoroughly dried. It's going to be also very, very strong. We're going to lay this on its back, and we're going to do a quick test fit. We're going to open up our cavity, wrap it around the landing gear. If you built the Fokker triplane or the SE5, this setup should be very similar to you. Now before we remove it, you're going to see just about an 1/8 inch in from the very edge is where the actual landing gear is going to protrude out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my finger right at the very edge, and I'm going to know to go in 1/8 of an inch. Grab it right here, bend it 90 degrees straight out. We're going to want the landing gear wire to be parallel with the horizontal surface. If you have to adjust it, just grip it here and bend the outside panel so you don't make this loose. One last test fit. This time we can kind of push into that notch, and there we go. I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to put a drop of hot glue on both sides here and all along our beveled edge. Same process as we did before. Notch this in, wrap it around the landing gear, and what I like to see is this landing gear be parallel to where the two struts are. It should naturally fit there anyway, but if you have to bend a little bit, that's okay. Now that we have one side done, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. We're going to open it up with the beveled end pointing towards the fuselage, cup it around, quick test fit, looks good. We're going to mark the very edge, drop down about 1/8 of an inch, bend the landing gear horizontal with the tail. We can open that up just a little bit. There we go. One last test fit. Looks great. And then we glue it in. Drop here, drop there, drop on the beveled edge, and we're going to repeat the exact same motions we did before. Around. And once again, we're kind of keeping it nice and horizontal to where the struts fasten in. There's lots of different wheels that you can use. The ones that we carry on the store are really good for grassy landings, and also kind of resembles what they used to use with the big Tundra tires that they used to put on these planes back in the days. So that's our really nice big wheels here. They complement it nicely. You can also use our spoked wheels like they used in the Fokker DR1 and the SE5. Alright, this is nice and firmly dried. Looks really good. Let's go ahead and put our wheels on this and make it a rolling chassis. We're going to slide our wheels on. Leaving about 1/4 of an inch, or about a little over 3/4 of a centimeter. We're going to cut off the edge. And then what I like to do is just simply put a little hot glue collet on there. I'm going to kind of dip it around there, kind of swirl it around. You can even take the front end of your blade, kind of bop it down. And then with the hot glue flowing towards the wheel, I'm going to spin it for about 30 seconds. Of course, if you have wheel collets, you can feel free to use them. This is a really good technique to make it, and all you need to do to slide your wheels on and off is break the glue joint, slide it off, and then repair it with another drop of hot glue. Same process as before. Slide it down, about 1/4 inch. Little drop, and then roll that wheel. Alright, our landing gear and wheel is now done. Let's go ahead and finish off this whole process and put this cover plate on the bottom. We're going to go ahead and remove the piece just like we did on the rear, on the bottom. If this is difficult and it rips in pieces, don't worry. You can always take it off piece by piece. We're going to leave this front end with the paper on. I'm going to go ahead and put a light crease in the center section here, just so we can bend this up to about a 30-45 degree angle. I'm also going to do a little bit of preforming here, and just let it establish a little bit of a curve. With the airplane on its back, we can do a test fit. The most important thing that we're going to want to do is to slide this parallel with the very front here. And with that parallel, we're going to carefully press this down into place all the way to the very back. You're going to notice that the back end's a little bit premature, so we're going to press this down a little bit, and that's going to leave a mark. That mark is where we're going to cut along. This is the reason why we had this right here. We're going to place our ruler down the line, carefully cut a score cut, crack the foam, and remove it from the paper. One more test fit. That looks really nice. Let's go ahead and carefully remove that one last time. Get a couple pieces of scrap foam handy. We'll go ahead and do the front here. Bead on the back. Once again, we're favoring mainly towards the foam, but letting it spill over on the paper so it glues it nice and tight. We've done this 3 times now, so it should be pretty natural. We're going to fold it all the way up to the leading edge, establish it down, work it on the way back, and this time it's going to drop right in. Don't want you guys to burn your hands, so use the foam block to give you downward pressure to seal everything in. I'm going to cut this just a little bit shorter, just so we don't have a ton hanging over. And I can just put a little bit of glue underneath this seam right here, and then press it on back. Our last step is going to be to open up this lower area right here. It's as simple as what we've done before. We're just going to follow this through. Get my hand out of the way here. Just going to follow this through all the way to the front. This area here is going to be where your battery compartment is. Our landing gear and lower belly is now done. We're ready to move on to our next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to be showing you how to install the last of your electronics, get your servos hooked up, make sure your throws are okay, and install your power pod and your fake motor. So for our electronics, we're going to need the following items. We're going to need our power pod that we built earlier. Just kind of a reference here, we had a surplus of the reverse threaded motors because we moved to lock nuts on our E-packs. So if this is black, don't worry, yours is going to be silver. We're just using them up. We're going to have our power pod, our ESC connected with the motor spinning in the right direction counterclockwise, and our receiver that's already bound. Easiest thing to start with is let's go ahead and trace our receiver. And we're going to start by passing our ESC wire up right over the top of the bulkhead and into the back cavity where our receiver is going to ultimately be. So for the Spectrum, all the channels are clearly marked. We're going to go ahead and plug this in the throttle, and on the indicator here, the horseshoe is signal, the negative is ground, and then plus is the power, and that's in the middle. So we're going to want to put this not in the bind plug, but in the throttle port, which is right here. Because this is a 3-channel, we're going to plug our rudder servo into our aileron. Once again, we're going to line up all of our grounds, all of our signal wires. So this is going to press right in this spot right here. Our last channel is our elevator. That's going to make us go up and down, and that's going to go right next to elevator. ELEV. This final check, all of our grounds are in a row, all of our signals on the top. Let's go ahead and power this on. We never ever put our props on until we're ready to go fly. As you can see here, our prop is not on. Now we're going to use this DX60 Spectrum transmitter. We're going to press it once and power it on. And because we already bound it, all we need to do now is plug in our battery. You should hear 3 beeps. There we go. And now when we give controls, we should see up, down, right, and left. Now this doesn't seem like a lot of throw here, but if you followed along with our build and use the holes that we used, that's going to be the perfect amount of throw. It's going to fly like a nice trainer, but when you give lots of throttle, it'll turn on a dime. Now it's very important at this point that you check and make sure that your controls are moving the proper direction. If you're using the DX6E, you're going to find if you hook this up exactly as my instructions were and the radio is a fresh model reset, that your right's going to be right, your left's going to be left. When you pull on the stick, it'll go up and down. So what you want to see is when you pull the stick back, you want to see the elevator rising at the trail edge. When you push it forward, you want to see it dropping. When you move it to the right, you want to see the rudder moving to the right, and when you move it to the left, you want to see it moving to the left. If that looks good, we're ready to move forward. If not, you need to reverse that channel. Keep in mind that the rudder is plugged into the aileron servo, so when you reverse that channel, you need to reverse the aileron, not the rudder. So you can see our rudder's just a touch off. Rather than trimming it out and limiting how much trim we can do in flight, I'm going to go ahead and press on this right mouse once, roll it down to the servo setup, roll it over once, scroll this to where it says sub trim, go down to aileron because that's the channel it's plugged into, click it once, and now when I roll this back and forth, you're going to be able to see the rudder move. Wrong way. There we go. Our elevator's spot on. We don't need to do any adjustment. We can hit back and go from there. Let's go ahead and go down to dual rates and expo. And let's go over, and you can see I already have my dual rates and expo dialed in at 80 and 30. That's exactly where we want it. If we did need to change it, all we need to do is click it once and we can roll it back and forth. What expo is it softens the center of your stick exponentially, so your really fine movements inside and then more drastic movements on the outer edges. You can see in this monitor how that works. 80% with 30% rates is good, and we're ready to move forward. Alright, our motor works. Let's go ahead and disconnect our batteries. And we'll hold this down for about 5 seconds, and it'll power off. With a DX6E, you don't have a slider button, you have a button that you press down to turn on, and to turn it off you have to hold it down for at least 5 seconds. So be careful when you get that you don't actually think it's off when it's really always on. It's a very nice feature to have, especially when you're flying, you don't actually bump the switch, turn your power off. Now that everything's spinning correctly, we're going to go ahead and install our power pod. Our power pod should nicely slide in. We want the ESC to get as much airflow as possible. So I'm going to actually tuck this in the back of the fuselage to get it in the airflow and keep it cool. For positioning the power pod, we're going to drop this all the way back, and you can see the very bottom of our former here. We're going to line this up perfectly flush with it. Now with our power pod in place, we're going to carefully poke this through with a twisting motion, just like a drill bit. It's going to be a little bit of resistance because keep in mind we have lots of hot glue, but it's going to hold the motor very securely. As we puncture each side, make sure that it hasn't moved. And we're not going to try to pass it through one side to the other. We're now going to carefully flip it over and pass it through these two holes. Now we can pass it from one hole to the other. And I'm going to cut this just on the other edge, just wide enough that we'll be able to grab it, but it won't really take away from the looks. Let's go ahead and do the same process on this side now. Pass it all the way through. And we'll just carefully cut it, just enough room to be able to grab it. Now we can take our ESC, and you see we have plenty of room in the back there. Let's go ahead and fold this down nice and flat. And as the air rushes through the fuselage, it's going to blow over this before it exits out the back end. And we have our wire free here. While we're working around the power pod, in the kit is included this Velcro strip. Now you can put the fuzzy or the prickly side on however you want, but I usually use the word fuzzy fuselage to remind me to put the fuzzy on the fuselage side. There's pluses and minuses both ways. There's no real rules. But I'm going to cut this carefully. Take a small portion. I'm going to stick it on the bottom of our power pod. We can keep the rest for future builds and also the prickly side for our battery. Let's carefully go ahead and take our wires. And I'm going to guide the long wire on this full range receiver towards the back and let it poke out the bottom. I'm going to let the receiver sit on the very bottom of the fuselage. And that way if we ever need to service it or take the receiver out, all we need to do is kind of reach down in there and carefully guide it out, and we can also guide it back in. If you ever have a strong desire to be able to service this, you can always cut this lower portion of this hatch back open. It'll open like a door, and then you can close it and then put a piece of tape on it. There we go. Our little antenna sticking out the back. Alright, so we have the radiator for our Model A, but we don't have the engine. Let's go ahead and build our engine right now. It's very simple. For our engine piece is going to look just like this. We're going to go ahead and carefully score cut and remove our cavities. If you're doing the 3D printed engine, all you simply need to do is print the engine And after you line it up with the radiator, glue it in place with a couple drops of glue. We're going to open up our 2 cavities. Carefully just peel away the excess tape paper, as you see here. Now this is going to be a B-fold. So we're going to fold both side cheeks in as you see here. And then this is going to roll up and form. Right where I started this rolling here, we're going to form that with our fingers just to take some of the pressure off and make life a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and put a little bit of glue on both sides. We're going to start about a 1/2 inch back from where it curls, just so we don't lock it in too badly. Then we're going to fold this up 90 degrees. I'm going to hold this in place just for a couple minutes with this front end in here, just to make sure it stays formed and that this will fold up nicely. Now that we have that movement and everything looks nice and clean, we're going to take a bead of glue on both sides, just as we did earlier. And rather than burning our fingers, we're going to let the table take the heat. Fold this down to a 90-degree angle. We're going to hold it there. And you can see I got a little generous on the glue. All we need to do is just move it to a different part of the table. We'll scrape that off later. You can see we have a nice little bit of extra here. Simply going to run our razor blade across it. Look at that, we have a little Model A engine. These little engines would love to have a spark plugs, so we can take our extra little piece of barbecue skewer here. I'm just going to kind of make its little dimples. I'm going to cut 4 little pieces. This is all aesthetic, you don't need to do this if you don't want to. About a 1/4 inch long. And we can insert these as our little spark plugs. From a distance, even the simple little engine looks amazing. Tap them all even. There's our spark plugs. Just put a little drop of glue. Very simple detail you can do, but it makes it cute. Now these holes on the side and on the top, you can actually take a bendable straw and you can make exhaust stacks. Now I want to paint this engine before we do that, so I'm going to skip that step for now. With our little motor built, we should be able to kind of slide it in. It's going to be a nice tight fit. And we got a little bit of a notch we need to cut to allow the motor to go over top of that wire. Let's go ahead and remove that material now. Depending on which way you move your motor, it's going to be on which side that needs to be removed. Just going to notch that in. No one will ever see it. Little custom trimming. Fit down nice and even right on top of that motor. Now we don't really need to glue this in. It's a nice friction fit. If you want to drop a couple drops, feel free to do so, or even a piece of tape. In this step, we're going to install the wings onto the fuselage and also add our struts. So for installing our wing, we're only going to need a few basic pieces. We're going to need our fuselage that we've been working on, our wing that we built earlier, and 4 barbecue skewers or struts. The first thing we want to do is we want to relocate and cut out the little slots that were on the top of our wing. With our holes relocated, we're going to go ahead. The back here is very simple. We can see that that passes through, but we need to project that location down to the bottom of the hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this extra little piece of push rod wire that I have. You can use a pen, you can use anything you really want. I'm just going to pop it straight down with a twisting motion. Don't use a barbecue skewer, it'll be a little too wide. Then project that line to the very bottom of what you see right here. Here and here. That's going to be the slot that I need to cut so our Cabane struts can pass cleanly through. One more time on this side. Now we can take our razor blade. We can cut our slot to receive our Cabane struts. So for a simple test fit, we're going to be very careful not to try to line up everything too quickly and dent our foam. Let's start with the back, and with a little bit of a rocking motion, you're going to see that it slides right on in. Now we can start projecting that towards the front. A little bit of rocking motion, a little bit of pressure, very slow. A little bit of delicate rocking pressure. We're going to rock it right in, just like that. Now that we got our Cabane struts or popsicle sticks sticking through the wing, we can start putting attention on the position of the wing. We're going to first look at the leading edge of the wing and kind of get our center from there, and then we're going to project it back towards the tail to make sure that we have the right incidence for the wing. So we're going to rock this back. A good indicator of where I want to see this is I want to see this about one width of foam underneath the radiator right here. So we took a piece of scrap foam and we laid it here. We want to see that edge of the foam meet the edge of the radiator. That's a nice position. You don't have to be too worried about this because the back is ultimately going to be what controls the angle of our wing. Now you can see at this point right here, if we gave power, this plane would loop because the wing is cupping way too far back. We're going to hold down the leading edge and we're going to slowly rise this up and visually look across, and we're going to find level. And we're going to slowly raise the trailing edge of the wing up until we're happy with the way it looks. An easy way to tell if this is level or not is taking a steel rule, and while holding it sideways on the bottom surface of the wing, we're going to project that line back and make it as parallel as possible to the elevator. Now, starting at the very front of the wing, we're going to make sure we position the wing in such a way that it's not tilted, but it's evenly raised on both sides. Use the elevator in the foreground to be able to kind of project and see if the distances are the same. This is a very slow flying airplane. It's very tolerant if it's a little bit crooked, but it looks a lot nicer if you take your time and get it nice and true. Before we do this on one last time, I'm going to lay my ruler down. Be careful not to move my wing. And project that ruler all the way back to the tail. Nice and parallel. Now here comes the clincher. We did all that work to get it nice and parallel both ways. I'm going to move this down just about 1 millimeter. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to just drop this down just about 1 millimeter. So if we look at it again and project it back, you can see that it just gets a little bit closer at the tail. That's going to give us just a breath of up incidence and help the plane fly nice and slow. One last check, it looks good. Drop a bead of glue, drop a bead of glue, little bead of glue, little bead of glue. I'm going to let this kind of soak down in. I'm going to hold it upside down. And we can even take some of our scraps now and really press that on in. After about 45 seconds to a minute, the glue should be thoroughly dried. I'm going to come back at the very end, and this is if you only want to. I'm going to go ahead and find this nice and flush, and I'm going to cut this off. Now just for a little extra rigidity, I'm going to press the nozzle down in this open crack. I'm going to squirt a nice bead of glue going down and cupping around those popsicle sticks just to give a little bit more. And then also, I'm going to push on each angle. Got a little sloppy, so I'm going to wipe up my mess. And one last item that we can do for a little bit extra strength is we're going to go ahead and push our nozzle and put a bead of glue on the very back of that radiator. And that's going to really help us get a nice firm glue joint. So the Pietenpols are really iconically known for having these cute struts with them with brace wires in between. We're going to go ahead and take our barbecue skewers and we're just going to line this up at the very edge, kind of roll through, not push it through both edges, just one surface, and then project yourself about 1/8 inch past the corner down on the bottom. We're going to cut that down. Before we pass this through, we can take our bottom and we can kind of use our tip to give us the angle we want. And now, when we pass this through, we can go through the bottom, little twisting motion, hit the top, little twisting motion as we lift up, and it pops right into place. Same process on the front. We're going to find our little hole there, pop it through the first layer, project about 1/8 inch past. These are 2 different lengths, so just don't take it for granted. Go ahead and measure and cut each time. Little twist. We'll save our pointy piece for our indent mark. Pass it in the bottom first, go down a little farther than what you need, and then twist back up right into the wing. Now before we go ahead and glue our struts in, let's go ahead and sight down the wing. What we want to look for is we want to look for a leading edge that's parallel with the trailing edge. If for some reason, say you're working with Adams Ready board from a dollar store, sometimes it's warped, sometimes even our water resistant foam board is a little bit warped, we can actually use these struts to push and pull and actually take the warp in and out as we need it. But in this case, it looks perfect on both sides. Adams has been working really hard to give us the best foam possible. I'm going to go ahead and just tack in at the very top here, and I'm going to leave the bottom alone. Just so as the shock of landing and maybe a cartwheel or two, these have the tendency to be able to either break easy or move around a little bit. I don't need to do any kind of bracing with this. It'll hold nice and rigid. Alright, for our final steps with balancing the plane, it's very simple. We're going to go ahead and put on our prop now. Make sure when you put on your prop that you get the appropriate little bushing here. If it includes bushings, you want to use them. Those are precision fits that will enable you to be able to get a shake-free prop and a very smooth flight. Put that on there. Twist on our prop. Go and tighten it. Once again, I'm just using one of our surplus reverse threaded motors. Yours is going to be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So for balancing this, our battery is going to fit in the very bottom. Our balance point is going to be just about the center of the spar right here. So you can see the spar go right in the center of it. And what we want to see is level or just a touch nose down. It's always good to have a slightly nose-heavy airplane for the first flight because we can always trim that out. If it's tail-heavy, it's going to be very squirrely in the air and difficult to fly. That looks great. We're now ready to go out and fly it. Alright, so our FT Mini Pietenpol is now ready to fly. If you've never test flown anything before, I'd strongly suggest that you try out a video called 6 Quick Tips for Successful First Flight. The link is down below. It'll make sure you have things like your reverse servos, the CG, launch into the wind, and along with a couple other tips that will help you have success. So we're all balanced out, controls are working good. It's kind of a downwind takeoff, but we're going to go ahead and put her up in the air anyway. Let's see how she goes. Well, it wasn't the most beautiful day for a test flight, but it was a lot of fun. Friends, I want to sincerely thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. I strongly encourage you, if you haven't made a memory or tried building Scratchbook for the first time, go ahead and do it. It's a rewarding process. It'll give you lots of fun times. All right, I'm going to put this back in, wait for a better day. We'll see you next time.